I think that's a really good discussion for this table, because I wrestle with that fucking constantly, and I bet every goddamn business owner in the world does.
The other kind of question, great, because you guys are all business owners, is kind of when you took that plunge, kind of how did you deal with that, you know, that insecurity of where your next
that
meal's
never goes
coming
away.
from? Does it at least get better? Or would it,
No.
An acquired taste.
fair enough.
There will be times
yes,
in
it does get better.
there will be times in your life where you are feeling more equipped in your mindset to manage that spectrum of emotion. But you will not ever be without that spectrum of emotion again. You're not ever going to have that sense of someone above me is going to handle shit. Like, that is a security blanket, and you've thrown that on the floor. Like, there's going to be times where you're like, I'm anxious and I've got this. And there's going to be times where you're like, I'm anxious and I don't know if I've got this.
When people ask me about being in business, I say, well, it's great because I get to live and die by my own sword. And it sucks because I live and die by my own sword. Which really, that's it in a nutshell.
So as long as it's just you and it's your emotions and it's you by yourself, your emotions are going to match the volatility of your life. The question I have for you is, how much control does your physiology have over your biology? Or how much control does your psychology have over your biology? How can you use your brain to manage your dopamine and your cortisol levels? Because you're entirely in charge of that now. You're not meeting the expectations of your supervisor, you're meeting your own expectations, right? And you have the ability to trigger a dopamine response or a cortisol response based on whether you are living up to or not living up to expectations. And so the question is, does it have to be someone else's expectations or could it be your own? And the way to program that is to break down the numbers like that, get to a point where you have a daily indicator and you can say, I crossed this line, I had a good day, right? So if you have an expectation to do 8 phone calls today and you do 10, dopamine. If you have an expectation to do 20 calls and you do 16, boom, cortisol. And so you can literally set up whether you're going to have dopamine driven or cortisol driven psychology on a daily and weekly basis by whether or not you choose to set and then achieve or not achieve specific goals. And you're in charge of both of those variables, what you set and whether you achieve them or not. So maybe you do your research on the internet, you find out 10 calls a day is what you need to do, but then you consistently only are able to get to 8 because of X, Y, Z variables in your life. Move 10 to make it 8. Now all of a sudden, instead of having a cortisol response every day for 2 fucking weeks because you're stubborn and you don't want to change your line, prove to yourself the real line, move the line, now you have a fucking dopamine response for the same work. And you as a business owner are 100% in command of that. So it's worthwhile to set the goal just to achieve it, just to trigger the dopamine response, just to program your psychology. It has nothing to do with even if you make any money. It's 100% about managing the neurochemistry. It comes back to that same question, Jordy, like, what does self-care actually look like and not be a platitude?
Yeah.
Because for me, self-care looks like continuing to work my fucking ass off in my business because it's the right and most important thing for me to do in my life.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like taking time off arbitrarily from my business to play a video game to win fucking internet points when I could win real life points called money. You know what I mean? To me, self-care looks like basically one thing, which is remaining present to the fact that I can only do the highest priority sitting right in front of me. If I let myself go off into the land of wish I coulds and shoulds and all that other type of bullshit, and I don't simply pick the next right highest priority thing to do, and while I'm doing that, acknowledge that it's the only thing I can be doing and the other things would never be done anyway, that to me is self-care. If I can't focus on my triage list, then it's like, what in my environment can I like clean up, sort out, fix so that I'm not distracted and that it's like, and I'm not uncomfortable or trying to work.
You're saying there's still a work in progress, but for the most part, that's kind of where it's at right now. For you guys anyway.
For me.
Yeah, for you.
I mean, each
right.
individual should have their own.
Right.
Like, I'm going to Hearth Home. What do you do?
So you're going to help them come up with their own hierarchy?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
So I'm going to use you as an example. You sit here, right? And someone who reports to you walks into your space and asks you a question, and they're standing and you're sitting, right? Who controls that space? Standing. And why do they control it? Because you can't fucking make them leave, right? An example of a management of time in the context of this would be, hi, great, thank you, what do you need? I'll come back to you in 5 minutes. That'll change your whole life, that one principle. When you have 8-hour days, right? And if I occupy an hour of your 8-hour day, it's like 12.5% of your time. And you already have too many things to do, right? So each of these levers that you can implement to like capture back 15 minutes, 15 minutes, 15 minutes, all of a sudden you're getting 7 extra tasks done in a week. Because every task you start and don't complete, you open a psychological loop with. And I guarantee you all have too many loops open. And that's a function of multi-pathing your tasks through time, right? A task that could be done in 15 minutes today, cut short 5 minutes, is going to require 10 minutes to finish tomorrow. Plus the 4 task switches, starting, stopping, starting, and stopping, costing you 20 minutes per task switch. And so for a lot of people, urgency and emergency interrupt the completion of duties. In part because you're not willing to tell a person, fuck off, I'll come to you. Right? And I'm being like extreme in my expression because I feel like a lot of you probably are less extreme than you need to be. So meet me somewhere in the middle on that. You know what I mean? Like, in order for you to be in a place where you know the thing you're doing is truly more important than the thing someone else wants you to do, you have to have a triage. And that triage needs to be hierarchical, and it's this or that in nature. You can't do multiple things at once, and so what is the one thing that must be done? And then the commitment is just to practice over time, working according to that hierarchy and acknowledging that if you don't get to the bottom of the hierarchy, you never would have anyway. Laying this out is going to be uncomfortable because you're used to being safe in having other people show up and give you things to keep your attention. Like, that's human nature. We love the shiny object. And it's hard to turn that off. Does that make sense what I just said? Is everyone on the same page as me? You can only ever do one thing at a time. If you don't complete things, you end up anxious and nervous, right? If you end up with too many things incomplete, now you feel behind and not knowing what to do, right? And then you get in a cycle. And so the important thing is to close loops. The only way to close a loop is to work one thing till it's done, to give yourself permission and recognize you never would have gotten the other things done you think you could have by sacrificing the time, and your task switching is costing you 30 to 40% of your time. Does that make sense? So what are your hierarchies? That's the question, Phil.